So, I mean, I saw you like, busy in the South America. Lots of things happening in
Yes.
South America. Oh my
Yes,
God.
it's true. There was a great election in Brazil and, and so on.
Because I saw some of your pictures with Lula.
Yes.
Tell us some of your, like thought when it was happening. It was happening in front of your eyes, the change in Brazil.
Well, I first went to Brazil 20 years ago and covered Lula's first presidential campaign. It's a long time ago, in one sense, because at the time it was, extraordinary because you had a kind of a centrist government of Fernando Henrique Cardoso. And Cardoso, was a dependency theorist economist. And when he came into office, people didn't realize that actually he's a kind of centrist politician, even
Mm,
though he writes about dependency theory and economics and so on. And Cardoso, ran the country in a neoliberal path to increase the wealth of the country, but to also sharpen inequality, which is the classic double bind of neoliberalism.
mm,
When Lula first won in 20 years ago, it was extraordinary because he came in and he said, we have an emergency. We've got to deal with the problem of hunger. We've got to deal with the problem of lack of access to education.
mm,
He made, Fernando Haddad the education minister. He basically went on a big tear to build public higher education institutions around the country, federally funded. He used high commodity prices to do that. Also was able to eradicate hunger, which was quite
mm,
considerable. Opened up relations with the African continent, made direct statements about Brazil's terrible history of slavery and racism towards Afro-Brazilians, talked about the Amazon and the indigenous. I mean, Lula is actually forgotten how interesting he was
mm,
right from the start. He involved himself a lot in international relations. He was
mm,
key to conducting a negotiation with the Iranians and the US to prevent escalation of US-Iranian hostility. He got a deal on the table and then Obama betrayed him. Obama backed out of that deal. So Lula was incredible in the beginning, And then I watched this attack first on Dilma Rousseff, who was the person who came right after Lula. She was the president. She's an incredible person. She was a guerrilla against the military dictatorship, which lasted 21 years. She was tortured in prison and so on. When she was president, the far right, which included Bolsonaro, really went after her and they impeached her. It was a kind of legislative coup d'etat where
mm,
they were extraordinarily offensive, misogynistic, and violent in the Congress while impeaching her. And then they started this project of getting Lula in jail and
mm,
accusing him of corruption and so on. Now, Brazil has had a history of corruption that goes
mm,
back 200 years. What happened during Lula's period was he put in place a number of institutions, that would manage, the investigations of corruption. And there was really no or little or less putting under the rug cases of corruption. So during the time of Lula, there was a lot of reporting about corruption because they were not suppressing the stories.
mm,
That's
mm,
one of the ironies. He personally was accused of corruption with absolutely no evidence. It was the statement made by a person who wanted to get out of jail.
mm,
So he kind of, I think, well, the courts decided later that he had fabricated the evidence. Kind of. The
mm,
courts didn't directly say that, but anyway, I visited Lula jail cell. He was in Curitiba in prison for 500 plus days. And every night and every day there was a camp outside the cell in Curitiba where people would say "Bon dia, Lula," "Good morning, Lula," "Good afternoon, Lula," "Good night, Lula," and so on for 500 days, and they kept his spirit up. Well,
mm,
eventually, the court last year decided in April that Lula could run again in the election. Well,
mm,
in this period, while he was in jail, you had Jair Bolsonaro, a man of the far right, as the
mm,
president, a
mm,
really terrible, genocidal president, who
mm,
declined to provide fresh water to communities in the Amazon during the pandemic. I mean, when all this talk from the WHO about wash your hands and so on. And he said, no, I'm not going to increase water supply. So, in that sense, genocidal. Well, it was a tough election because the election spanned all of October. And in early October, on the 2nd, was the first round. Lula came first of all the candidates, but didn't get over 50%. But the Congress, the federal deputies and the Senate was captured by the right wing. So the Bolsonaristas actually control the legislature even now. Lula prevailed in the second round by a very slim margin of only about 1.5 million votes in the second round on the 30th of October. So Brazil is at a tough phase where Lula once again is going to have to come into office and say, let's end hunger, let's increase education. Everything he did 20 years ago, he's going to have to repeat. Because in just a few years, the right wing had basically undone everything. In 6 years, the right has undone the gains made under Lula. It's pretty incredible.